The meeting had just ended. The kind of meeting that leaves a bitter taste in the air, like smoke after a controlled burn. People were standing up, gathering their files, murmuring softly to each other, until her voice sliced through the buzz. "Can I have the password now?" she asked, tilting her head as though the word should fall into her lap like candy. His daughter. 21, barely old enough to rent a car, but somehow given authority over the very thing I had helped build, from the ground up. She sat there in the conference chair like it was a throne, legs crossed, a latte cup dangling lazily from her fingers. Sunglasses still on, indoors. Her smile was casual, like my life was a button she could press. I kept my tone steady, though I felt a shiver ripple through me. "I'm sorry, sir," I said, turning to him. "I can't give her the password." The room fell still, as though the walls had leaned in to listen. My heart pounded hard enough I thought they might hear that instead. I wasn't trying to be defiant. I was protecting something fragile, something still unfinished. That password didn't just unlock the system, it unlocked sensitive data. Our in-progress model, our backup of client metrics, things that needed time, precision, care. He blinked, lips tightening, and I saw the shift in his posture, the subtle tension that warned of a storm about to break. Then came the words, "Quick." Cold, measured, "You're fired." The sentence landed like a bullet. A pause followed, thick and heavy. Eyes widened. A coffee cup clattered quietly in the back corner. No explanation, no room for response. Just raw public dismissal. A clean, brutal execution of everything I had given to this company. People didn't speak. They just watched. Some looked down, too cowardly to meet my gaze. Others looked at him, confused but silent. It wasn't their place, I guess. That's how it works. No one speaks up until it's their own name on the chopping block. I swallowed the lump in my throat and stood up slowly. My chair scraped loudly against the tile floor. I bent to gather my few belongings, my notebook, a pen, a mug with the company logo on it that I'd earned after the first year. My hands shook as I zipped my laptop into its case. Her laugh. Low, amused. I glanced at her. She looked bored again, scrolling through her phone, lips curled in a smug little smirk. The same expression someone wears when watching dominoes fall. Chest tightened, a dull ache blooming behind my ribs. Not sadness, not yet, just disbelief. How easy it had been for them to erase me, but not all of them had blank eyes. His wife stood near the corner of the room, not speaking, not interfering, but her gaze met mine. There was something there. Pity, maybe. Guilt. I didn't know her. Well, but I knew enough to see when someone realized a wrong was being done and chose not to stop it. I looped my bag over my shoulder and turned toward the door. But as I passed the cabinet where I kept backup drives, my fingers slipped one into my coat pocket. Just muscle memory, maybe. Or maybe instinct. I didn't even glance at it. Didn't need to. I knew what was on it. The software. My software. Hours of code, research, testing, mine. I stepped into the hallway. The noise of the meeting room dimmed behind me, but the roar inside my chest grew louder. Rage, hurt, shame, a cocktail that burned going down. I'd given everything to this. Job, my time, my talent, my belief that hard work would be rewarded. But all it took was one entitled demand from a girl who hadn't built a single block of the empire to send me crashing down. They didn't know she had already made a mistake, a big one. Just yesterday, I saw her poking around the restricted branches of the repository, opening things she didn't understand. She thought she was clever, experimenting like it was a game. I had locked things down for a reason. That password she wanted, if she got it, it would be like giving a child a match in a paper house. But he didn't ask why. He didn't listen. Just fired me. As I pushed open the glass door into the cool afternoon air, the sun hit my face like a slap. I paused, the noise of the city rushing past me. Horns, footsteps, life, moving on. I had been erased, cleanly, efficiently. But there was something they forgot. I still had the code. I still had the truth. And I was no longer chained to their silence. The flash drive in my pocket felt like a heartbeat. Steady, waiting. They had humiliated me in front of everyone. But I wasn't done yet. 4 years ago, I walked into that office with my portfolio in hand and a dream in my chest so fragile I almost held my breath when I stepped inside. The place didn't look like much, just a converted warehouse with mismatched desks, whiteboards, covered in illegible scrawls, and a coffee machine that sputtered more than it brewed. But something about it felt alive, like it was waiting to become something. Mr. Karam interviewed me himself. Back then, he had a gentler face, one that lit up when talking about innovation and disruption, about building a product that would change the industry. His voice had gravity, confidence. I remember thinking, this man builds empires, and I wanted to be a part of that. He smiled after I showed him my code samples and said, "You're exactly the kind of mind we need. Someone who thinks like a system. Welcome aboard." It felt like being chosen. I was 27, eager, and determined to prove myself. The salary was modest, but I didn't care. I wanted to create something real. I gave everything. Long nights, double shifts, sleeping on the couch in the back room just so I could meet a sprint deadline. While others went out on weekends, I stayed in, debugging lines that looked more like poetry to me than math. I wrote each module like it was a verse, stringing together logic with elegance. And the software, it started to breathe. Slowly, glitch by glitch, it came alive. An integrated solution for secure data tracking and dynamic reporting, all wrapped in a flexible framework. Nothing existed like it. It was beautiful. I knew its architecture better than I knew my own apartment. I could trace its threads like veins in the back of my hand. At first, Mr. Karam was encouraging, not overly generous with praise, but appreciative in a way that made me feel valuable. He'd pat my shoulder and say, "You're the brain behind the curtain, our little wizard." I smiled when he said that. I thought it meant I was essential. But slowly, the spotlight drifted to others. Louder voices, smoother talkers. I didn't mind. I told myself, real builders don't need applause. I stayed behind the curtain, making things work. That was before the team grew, before investors came in, before the logo was redesigned, the office moved uptown, and the air started to smell like ambition and expensive perfume. That's when she began showing up. His daughter. A blur of designer heels and perfume that lingered long after she left the room. She'd waltz into meetings uninvited, offer uninformed opinions, and demand access to parts of the system she didn't even understand. "Let me try," she'd say, like it was a game. The first time I told Mr. Karam she was a liability, he laughed. "She's curious. She's still learning. You were like that once, too." I wasn't. I had studied, researched, sacrificed. I didn't stomp through people's work demanding access like a child pounding on piano keys. But I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet. Then came the times I noticed small edits to the system. Changes I hadn't authorized, data moved or erased. I traced them back to her account more than once. I tried to explain the risk to Karam, but he brushed it off. "She's family," he said, like that was a shield strong enough to protect the system we'd built. I started documenting everything, silently, carefully. I kept backups. Tracked unauthorized access. Not because I was paranoid, because I knew deep down that something was shifting. I wasn't seen as the architect anymore. I was the old scaffolding they planned to tear down once the building was finished. My contributions stopped getting mentioned in meetings. Ideas I floated weeks ago would suddenly reappear in someone else's mouth, dressed up in buzzwords. They called it team synergy. I called it erasure. Still, I stayed. Because the software was mine. Not on paper, not in legal terms, but in spirit. I had nursed it into life. I knew its habits, its temper. I protected it like it was my own child. And I stayed because I believed loyalty still meant something. When she came to me that day, eyes hidden behind sunglasses, mouth curled in amusement, I didn't say no to her request out of defiance. I said no because I had a responsibility. That password was the last lock keeping fragile, sensitive modules safe. She didn't understand that, and worse, she didn't care. But none of that mattered. Not to him, not to them, because in that office, the rules were written by bloodlines, and I was just a name on the payroll. That's what burned the most. Not the firing, not the public spectacle, but the realization that I was never more than a tool. Something to be used, kept sharp, and then discarded. I had given this company everything: my time, my skills, my sense of self. I had moved to a cheaper apartment just to be closer to the office. I'd missed weddings, birthdays, funerals, telling myself it would all be worth it once we launched, once we made it. But when it came down to it, my loyalty wasn't even worth a question, just a sentence. "You're fired." As if I were the one who didn't understand the system, as if I hadn't built it with my bare hands. The day after I was fired, time stopped meaning anything. I lay on my couch in silence, still in the clothes I'd worn the day before. My phone sat face down on the coffee table. No calls, no messages. The apartment was still and lifeless, like it was mirroring me. The walls, once warm with posters and pinned-up project sketches, now looked like tombstones for dreams that had died quietly, overnight. I hadn't realized how loud the office had been. Keyboard clacks, coffee brews, overlapping. Voices until I was stripped of it. Now, all I had was the hum of the fridge and the throb in my chest that wouldn't stop. They hadn't just fired me. They'd erased me. My email had been deactivated before I even made it home. My company Slack was gone, archived, locked. The why Shared drive I'd maintained for years showed nothing under my user ID. As if I'd never been there. As if the lines of code I'd written, the architecture I'd designed, had just appeared. I'd stayed up for 3 nights once, perfecting the integration between 2 warring modules. That code made the entire platform possible. Now it bore her initials, his daughter's, at the bottom of the latest commit. I read the patch notes in disbelief. They'd attributed the newest update to her. She hadn't even written a dozen lines in her life. My name was nowhere. I pressed my palms to my face and didn't realize I was shaking until I pulled them away and saw the tear streaks. I hadn't even noticed myself crying. What burned wasn't the lie. It was how easily the lie became the new truth. That afternoon, I tried logging into the legacy system, one of the older internal builds I knew she didn't fully understand. A few devs still used it for staging and load testing. I had access, barely. My clearance was still active there, maybe because someone forgot to disable it. The dashboard loaded. My heart raced. At first, I thought it was a glitch, then another, then a full-blown panic. Modules were breaking, dependencies misaligned, whole sections of code overwritten by a hand that had no idea what it was touching. I traced it, her access signature. She'd gone in blind, moved things around, tried to optimize something she didn't understand. I watched error logs pour in like bleeding veins, each one a red siren. Fatal exception, module load failed, dependency conflict, data structure, invalid. My child was dying. Slowly, code by code. I did the unthinkable. I reached out. One message, one clean factual warning. No emotion. Just an email to Mr. Karam, CCing the lead dev. Your latest commit introduced irreversible corruption to the analytics module. If not patched immediately, it will cascade and disable your primary reporting dashboard. Please roll back. I can assist. No reply. Not even a read receipt. The next morning, I got a cold 2-line email from his assistant. Please do not contact us further. Any future communication will be considered a breach of your severance agreement. There was no severance. They hadn't given me a contract to sign. It was a threat disguised as formality. I read it over and over until the words blurred. I'd given them everything. They gave me silence and legal threats. That night, I collapsed in the shower. I let the water run cold, kneeling, arms wrapped, around my legs. My skin shriveled. My bones ached. But I stayed there until it hurt to breathe. I couldn't recognize myself anymore. Who was I without my work? Without the thing I had shaped and polished and loved like a living thing? They hadn't. Just taken my job. They'd taken my name, my fingerprint, my place in the world, and then, like the first flicker of light after a blackout, I remembered the flash drive. It was still in the coat I'd worn when I walked out. I hadn't unpacked it. I hadn't touched anything. But the moment my fingers closed around it, I felt something click inside me, like a lock turning. I dried off trembling, sat at my old desk, plugged it in. There it was, the clean backup, the real one. Time-stamped, secured, authenticated with my old credentials. Unedited, untouched. My code, my notes in the margins, my fingerprints, the version before she'd gotten her hands on it, before they started stripping me away from it. I stared at the screen, feeling breath return to my lungs for the first time in days. They could silence me, but they couldn't rewrite truth forever. I whispered aloud, as if saying it made it real. You took everything but my name, and I'm taking that back. Something shifted in me then, like a crack in ice beginning to spread. The pain didn't vanish. The grief didn't lift. But it started to take shape. Sharper. More useful. I hadn't lost everything. I still had the blueprint, the story, the living proof. I still had me, and they had no idea what they'd left behind. I left the city before the sun had even risen, a single duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the flash drive tucked deep in an inner pocket like a heartbeat I was still guarding. I didn't know where I was going, only that it had to be far. Somewhere. The silence wasn't a threat. Somewhere I didn't have to see glass buildings reflecting back the pieces of myself I no longer recognized. I bought a train ticket to a town I couldn't pronounce, a coastal place where the station was little, more than a bench and a vending machine. The air smelled like salt and forgotten summers. There were more seagulls than people, and no one asked why I'd come. I rented a tiny room above a cafe. The walls were thin, the furniture chipped, but the sea was visible from the window, and that was enough. The owner, an older woman named Miriam, handed me the keys with a warm nod. She didn't ask about references, just looked into my eyes and said, "You look like someone who needs quiet." I got a job using a different name, nothing big, just tutoring kids in basic coding. Word spread slowly. Parents who worked late started dropping off their daughters, and sons with laptops and tired eyes. They didn't care about my resume or what tech giants I'd worked for. They cared that their children left smiling, saying they'd learned how to make a little game or design a website. There was one girl, 16, withdrawn, always wearing headphones. She reminded me of myself. Quiet brilliance hiding under a shield. After 3 weeks, she showed me her first program. "It's not much," she said, barely looking up. But it was. It was. Because it was hers. That night, I sat in my room, the flash drive plugged into my laptop, and for the first time, I opened the files not to protect them, but to reclaim them. I rewrote old functions, smoothed broken lines. I didn't plan to launch it. I wasn't building an empire. I was stitching back the soul they'd tried to rip away. There was comfort in the rhythm. Coffee in the morning, walks along the shore, coding at night. I started reading again. Journals I'd kept from my early days at the company, full of notes and hopes and longings I'd forgotten I'd had. I remembered how much I loved creating. Not for profit, not for praise, but for the elegance of a clean line, the way logic could become beauty. One evening, Miriam knocked gently at my door. Some letters came, no return address. She handed them to me with a look that said she wouldn't pry. Inside were 2 envelopes. The first was blank. The second had my old name on it, my real one. I opened the blank one first. Inside was a folded note. "We're in trouble. Systems crashing. Clients threatening lawsuits. They're blaming you." It was unsigned, but I knew the voice behind it. An ex-colleague. Quiet, Honest. One of the few who'd looked away when I was fired. Not out of agreement, but fear. I stared at the message for a long time, not with anger, not even with satisfaction, with clarity. They'd built their house on stolen ground and the foundation was rotting. In the second envelope was a copy of the official report. My name wasn't just erased. They'd falsified data logs, created new commit histories to match her credentials. But they were sloppy. I could see the cracks. Digital fingerprints don't lie. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just leaned back in my chair and looked out at the sea. They were trying to bury me, but I'd already learned to live underground, and I had something they would never have: the truth, and the original blueprint. My name, my code, my proof. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. It wasn't a smile of spite or revenge or bitterness. It was the kind of smile that comes when you realize you survived. I was more than what they took from me, more than the silence they tried to drown me in. I was the builder, the architect, and I was still standing. The sunrise looked different now, not softer, sharper, like a line being drawn across the sky, like the beginning of something clean. I sat by the window of my rented room above the cafe, warm tea cupped between my palms, watching the light slowly ink its way across the ocean. That morning, I made a quiet decision. I wouldn't just survive, I would rebuild. Not out of revenge, out of truth. I started with the flash drive, my arc. Line by line, I traced back my original code. I pulled timestamps, cross-checked commit IDs. I opened old project logs buried deep in forgotten folders, documenting every version I'd built. Every module had my digital fingerprints, the commented lines, the unique logic paths, the naming conventions only I used, and the signature, my quiet ritual, at the end of every critical build. Completed 3:07 a.m. by AZ. I had forgotten how much I left of myself in the work. Emails, text messages, screenshots. My digital past laid out before me like breadcrumbs leading back to the woman I had been. I organized everything into a living journal. Not for court, not to post online, but for the truth to exist. Undisputed, undistorted. Some nights it was hard to keep going. The shame still echoed in me, the memory of being fired echoing louder than applause ever did. But now I wrote through it, coded through it. I whispered through the silence, and then came the unexpected knock on the cafe's back door. It was Miriam holding her phone, squinting. "A man named Idris wants to speak with you. Says he saw your work. The interactive tutorial module you uploaded last week?" I'd almost forgotten. A small side project, teaching kids how to debug. It had gone semi-viral in a quiet way, passed around parent forums and local educator groups. I nodded, cautious. "Okay." Idris was polite, sharply, dressed and nothing like the venture capitalists I'd known. He didn't pitch. He listened. I told him my story, not with tears or drama, but with the same precision I'd coded with. Straight facts, hard truths. My voice didn't shake. He leaned back when I finished and said simply, "Would you consider building it again? But yours? This time. With your name on it." I didn't say yes. Not yet. For the first time, I wanted to answer to myself before I answered anyone else. That night I stood in front of the mirror and looked. Really looked. The woman who stared back at me wasn't the one who'd once flinched at raised voices, who'd once believed loyalty could earn love or credit or even fairness. She had been buried. In her place stood someone quieter, steadier. The lines under her eyes weren't from age. They were from nights survived, from betrayals withstood. So I picked up the phone, not to say yes to Idris, to call him Mr. Karam, the man who had once praised my brilliance, then erased it with a public order. He answered on the third ring. His voice hesitated. Hello? It's me. Silence. I'd like a meeting. In person. Pause. Of course. 2 days later, I walked back into that building, wearing the same coat I had left in. The receptionist's eyes widened slightly, recognition, or perhaps a flicker of regret. She didn't ask why I was there. The boardroom hadn't changed. Same cold glass walls, same leather chairs. But I was not the same. Mr. Karam stood when I entered. He looked older, not in years, but in the sagging posture of a man who'd realized the ground beneath him had shifted. He motioned for me to sit. I didn't. Instead, I pulled out a small tablet and placed it in front of him. I want to show you something. He looked down. The screen lit up with my evidence, code histories, email exchanges, digital signatures. My voice restored in every file. His face went pale. This is just a copy, I said, calm. The originals are safe, dated, verified. I don't want an apology. I want clarity. He swallowed. What are you planning to do with this? I tilted my head slightly. That depends. But let's start with this. You will remove her name from my software. She didn't know what she was doing. I was trying to help her grow. She crashed a quarter of the system, and you blamed me. You fired me in front of an entire team. You let my work be claimed by someone who didn't even understand it. He said nothing. I rebuilt it. I added softly. Not for you. For me. He looked up at me then. Really looked. I was wrong. Yes, I said. You were. There. Was no satisfaction in that moment, only stillness. A reckoning of truth, too late to matter in the ways it once might have. I didn't threaten him. I didn't sue him, but I did tell him the terms. You will release a statement. You will acknowledge what happened, clearly, publicly. Not for credit, for correction. And if I don't? I smiled gently. Then I'll release the version with timestamps. And I won't even have to say a word. The truth will speak for itself. He nodded, a slow, defeated motion. Understood. I left the building without looking back. A week later, the press release was issued. My name, printed clearly. A correction. An apology. It made quiet waves in the industry. But I didn't care about the applause. I cared that I had done it without becoming like him. I met Idris again the following month. This time, I said yes. We started small. Just a clean rebuild of the original architecture. But this time, every piece bore my signature, and I built a team. Not of the best resumes, but of the best hearts. People who knew how it felt to be overlooked. People who had once been silenced. We built something not just functional, but human. My blueprint wasn't just code anymore. It was legacy. It was my name, my story, my voice, and no one could take it again. The meeting room was full. They'd chosen the large one, the kind meant for quarterly investor calls and overconfident product launches. The walls were glass, the air too crisp, sterile like something pretending not to tremble. I could hear the nervous shifting of bodies before I opened the door. Inside, him, Mr. Karam, once so effortlessly powerful, now sitting at the head of the table like a man guarding a crumbling throne. To his left, his daughter, sunglasses pushed into her hair. This time, jaw clenched, a small storm waiting to explode. And beside her, their legal team, suits with pens, blank eyes. On the right, a few ex-colleagues, some avoiding my gaze, some looking like they wanted to say something but didn't know what. And then me. I didn't dress for intimidation. No sharp heels or sleek blazer. Just a navy coat I'd worn on my first day 4 years ago and a quiet resolve that didn't need armor. "Good morning," I said, setting my tablet on the table with a soft click. No one answered. That was fine. I tapped the screen. Let's begin. First, the timeline. Day 1 of development to the last line I was allowed to write. The screen lit up with version histories, file names, timestamps, user logs. "Here," I said, pointing. "Prototype Alpha. Dated 4 years ago. Initialized and committed by me. Solo." Next came the source code signatures, each critical. Algorithm signed with my initials in embedded documentation. Each update tracked through my credentials. I projected backup logs, screen recordings from development sprints, internal chat threads, design drafts, a living map of my labor, my time, myself. No interruptions, just silence cracking under its own weight. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Each sentence landed with a quiet finality that sucked the air out of the room. When I got to the access logs, the unauthorized ones, his daughter shifted in her chair. These show an internal breach into the security layer on a restricted day. This ID, I tapped again, matches the device registered to Ms. Karam. She logged into a sensitive development environment. She was never given clearance for that. Her mouth opened. I held up a hand. "You don't need to explain. The damage is already done. You accessed and corrupted core files. You exposed client data in the sandbox environment and triggered multiple errors in live modules. The system began collapsing from the inside." Her face flushed red. She looked to her father. He couldn't meet her eyes. I turned to him instead. "You fired me for refusing to give her the password. And in doing so, you handed over a loaded weapon to someone who didn't know which way to aim." He swallowed. Hard, but said nothing. "Reached out once," I continued, sliding my finger across the screen to display the unanswered email. "To warn you, your assistant replied with a request not to contact the company further. That same week, you launched the update, tagged with her name." His legal team shifted now. One leaned forward, about to speak. I looked up. "Everything in this file has been timestamped, witnessed, and legally authenticated. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to end this." I clicked once more, and the final slide appeared. My legal claim for authorship and ownership of the core software architecture, including intellectual property filings from the relaunch under a new brand. all supported by my backup logs. I had rebuilt the software, improved it, documented every step. And I had done it without touching a single proprietary asset from the company. Clean, ethical, untouchable. The room stayed still, no one even breathing. Too loudly, I looked directly at him. 4 years of loyalty, of silence, of giving you everything while asking for nothing but integrity. And you repaid it with public humiliation, with theft, with erasure. Finally, he spoke. His voice was nothing like the one I remembered. This one was thin, dry. I'm sorry. I nodded. You should be. But not for me. For the version of yourself you killed to get here. He blinked like I'd slapped him. His wife stood up then. She'd been sitting quietly in the back of the room. I hadn't even noticed her until she moved. She looked at me, eyes glassy, lips tight, and then turned and walked out without a word. No one followed her. The legal team murmured amongst themselves now, debating something under their breath. Wasn't listening. I pulled out one final item from my bag. A letter. These are the terms. Effective immediately, the software you currently run will be decommissioned per legal order. You are to cease using my intellectual property. You will transfer what's left of the rights you attempted to register. In return, I will not pursue further damages. Not today. He nodded slowly, like it physically hurt to do so. I handed the document across the table. I suggest you sign. He reached for the pen with a shaking hand. When he finished, I stood. I didn't wait for a thank you. There was nothing to be grateful for. I walked out with the ownership papers in my coat pocket, the same pocket that had once carried the flash drive they tried to pretend didn't exist. Outside, the wind was sharp but clean. The next morning, the company issued a statement. Formal, flat, but clear. They were suspending operations of their signature product and withdrawing their current update. My name was not buried this time. I returned to my quiet town by the sea, to the cafe and the ocean and the bookstore that always smelled like cinnamon and dust. I reopened my codebase and renamed the core framework. No more initials, no more hiding behind corporate branding or team collaborations. Just my name. On every page. Every module. And then I prepared the relaunch. A new product, clean, clear, transparent, built from pain, but born from truth. Kept only one thing from my former life. An empty picture frame I'd once kept on my desk in the old office. It used to be reserved for a photo of my parents, or my brother, or a graduation memory. I never filled it. I left it empty as a reminder that I had been willing to be invisible for people who never saw me, that I'd allowed silence to define my worth. Now it reminded me of something else. That space can be sacred, that what you don't let in is just as important as what you do. And as I typed the last line of the launch script, my fingers steady, and sure, I whispered the one truth that had carried me through everything. You never needed the password, because it was never hers to ask for. It was always mine to guard, and now it opened only for me.